A man walks into an airport the day before Thanksgiving 1971 carrying a briefcase and a secret. A few hours later, he has $200,000 in ransom money, 4 parachutes, and control of a commercial airliner. Then, somewhere over the dark forest of the Pacific Northwest, he jumps out of the back of the 727 Boeing and vanishes into the night. No body was ever found. No parachute never found. Almost none of the money ever turned up. More than 1,000 suspects have been investigated. The FBI spent 45 years chasing leads, military aircraft, submarines, helicopters, forensic scientists, treasure hunters, and armchair detectives have all tried to solve the mystery. And they all ran into one same problem. Nobody knows who D.B. Cooper really was. Was he a military parachutist with carefully planned escape route? Was he an airline insider who knew secrets about the Boeing 727 that few people outside the industry understood?
Possible.
Did he survive the jump and spend the rest of his life quietly watching the world search for him?
With $200,000?
Or did he die somewhere in the wilderness within minutes of leaving the airplane? More than 50 years later, the only thing everyone agrees on is that one man pulled off the most famous hijacking in American history, stepped into the darkness, and somehow became a legend in the process.
Look at that shit.
And that's the story of old D.B. Cooper. It's the man who got away.
But did he?
Got away.
24th of November, 1971, night before Thanksgiving. A man walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines at the ticket counter at Portland International Airport. He paid cash for a one-way ticket to nowhere. The ticket was for a flight 305, a short 30-minute trip, Portland to Seattle, to go into the Tacoma International Airport. When he bought the ticket, he gave his name, Dan Cooper. People who saw him later described him as a white man, mid-40s, dark hair, brown eyes, dressed like a businessman, wearing a dark suit, white shirt, thin black tie, raincoat, and brown shoes. He carried a black case and a brown paper bag. Cooper, he boarded Flight 305, Boeing 727, 100 registered as 9467 U.S. He took C.
Don't know why it would be 9, but sure.
Right. He took C-18E in the very last row of the aircraft and ordered a bourbon and a 7-Up. There were 36 passengers on board, along with a crew of 6. The flight consisted of Captain William A. Scott, First Officer William Radizak, they call him Bill, a flight engineer Harold Anderson, and the cabin crew included flight attendants Alice Hancock, Tina Mucklow, and Florence Schaffner. Flight 305 left Portland on schedule, 2:50 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Not long after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to the flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She was sitting in the jump seat at the back of the airplane, directly behind him. At first, Schaffner assumed the note was nothing more than a lonely businessman trying to pass along his phone number.
Like probably hundreds and hundreds have done before.
She didn't even look at it. She slipped a note into her purse. And a few moments later, Cooper leaned toward her and quietly said, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." Well, I guess you don't need to look at it then, right? Schaffner, she unfolded that very note and she read it, written neatly, all capital letters, with a felt tip pen. It said, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase, and I want you to sit by me." She handed the note back to D.B. Cooper, took the seat beside him, and quietly asked if she could see the bomb. Cooper opened his case and said, "There it is, baby." Inside, Schaffner saw what looked to be very much like a real explosive device. Large cylindrical battery connected by wires, 2 rows of 4 red cylinders that she believed were sticks of dynamite. After giving her a look inside, Cooper closed the briefcase and began laying out his demands.
Well, she wrote everything down, carried the information to the cockpit, and informed the flight crew about what was happening. Captain William Scott instructed her to remain in the cockpit for the rest of the flight and keep notes on events as they unfolded. Scott then contacted Northwest Flight Operations in Minnesota and passed along the hijackers' demands. Cooper, he said he wanted $200,000 delivered in a knapsack by 5 p.m. He also demanded 2 front parachutes and 2 back parachutes. The money, he says, has to be in negotiable American currency. The request for 4 parachutes immediately caught attention. By asking for two complete sets instead of 1, Cooper created the impression that he intended to take a hostage with him when he left the aircraft, which is smart.
Well, he had 4 parachutes.
That made it much less. Well, you got to back up and
Right.
You're going to use both of them. Maybe. Hopefully not. But
right.
That made it much less likely authorities would risk giving him faulty equipment, too. With Schaffner now staying in the cockpit, flight attendant Tina Mucklow, she took over as the go-between for Cooper and the flight crew. Cooper passed along more instructions through Mucklow. When the aircraft landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, he wanted fuel trucks waiting for the plane. He also ordered that all passengers remain in their seats while Mucklow brought the ransom money on board. Once he had the money, he said, the passengers, they can all go. After the final items brought into the aircraft, Cooper insisted would be the 4 parachutes.
Right.
Captain William Scott immediately notified air traffic controllers at SeaTac Airport about the hijacking. SeaTac then contacted both the Seattle Police Department and the FBI. Meanwhile, the passengers had no idea it was really happening. They just told that their arrival in Seattle would be delayed because of minor mechanical problems.
I bet.
Donald Nyrup, who was president of the Northwest Airlines at the time, he authorized payment of the ransom and instructed company employees to fully cooperate with the hijacker and comply with his demands. He's not kidding around, Dan.
Right. Roughly the next 2 hours, Flight 305 remained in holding pattern over Puget Sound. The delay gave the FBI and Seattle police enough time to gather $200,000 for that ransom. They located the parachutes and got emergency personnel into position. Back in the cabin, Cooper insisted that Tina Mucklow stay behind the entire time. Years later, Mucklow recalled that Cooper seemed surprisingly familiar with the area below. At one point, while looking out the window, he casually remarked, "Looks like Tacoma down there," as the aircraft passed over Tacoma. When Mucklow mentioned that the parachutes were being brought from McCord Air Force Base, Cooper immediately noted that McCord was about a 20-minute drive from SeaTac. Comment stood out because it suggested he knew the local geography quite well. Mucklow also remembered Cooper as being calm throughout the whole ordeal. He wasn't nervous, she said. He seemed rather nice. He wasn't cruel or nasty. As the aircraft continued circling over to Seattle, the two talked from time to time. Mucklow eventually asked why he chose Northwest Airlines. Cooper laughed and replied, "It's not because I have a grudge against your airline, no. It's because I have a grudge. That's it." He then explained that the flight simply happened to fit his needs.
The one that was going where I needed to go.
Right. The conversation drifted to more personal topics. Cooper asked Mucklow where she was from. She told him, "I'm from Pennsylvania, but I'm living in Minneapolis right now," she said. Cooper responded that Minnesota was a very nice country. Mucklow then asked where he was from. The question immediately changed his mood. Cooper became irritated and refused to answer. A little later, Cooper asked whether she smoked and offered her smoke. Mucklow told him she had quit smoking, but she accepted a cigarette anyway. Yeah, you know.
Might be the time to take it up again.
Right. According to FBI records, Cooper, he did have at least one brief interaction with another passenger while on Flight 305. One passenger, George Labazinier, later told FBI agents that he used the restroom at the rear of the aircraft several times during the flight. After one of those trips, he said he found the aisle blocked by a passenger wearing a cowboy hat. The man was questioning Tina Mucklow about the mechanical problem that was supposedly delaying their arrival. Labaginaire said that Cooper initially seemed amused by the exchange. After a while, though, he appeared irritated and told the man, "Get your ass back in your seat." According to Labaginaire, the passenger ignored Cooper and kept questioning Mucklow. And Labaginaire claimed he eventually stepped in and persuaded the man, "Just go back to your seat, bud."
Unfortunately for that guy, though, Mucklow remembered the incident just a little different. She said a passenger approached her and mentioned he was bored and wanted something to read. The two moved to an area directly behind Cooper and looked through some magazines. The passenger eventually picked up a copy of the New Yorker and just calmly headed back to his seat. When Mucklow returned to Cooper, he reportedly said, "If that is a sky marshal, I don't want any more of that." Ooh. Mucklow reassured him that there was no sky marshals on board the flight. Despite having what may have been the closest interaction of any passenger with Cooper during the hijacking, the man in the cowboy hat was never interviewed by the FBI and was never even identified.
Really?
He simply became another loose end in a case already filled with them.
I bet he was an air marshal.
While all this was happening in the air, authorities on the ground were scrambling to meet Cooper's demands. That old $200,000 ransom was assembled by Seattle First National Bank, delivered in a bag that weighed about 19 pounds. That weight came from the fact that the ransom consisted of exactly 10,000 unmarked $20 bills, just as Cooper had requested.
Okay.
Before the money was turned over, the FBI photographed the bills on microfilm. Most of the serial numbers begin with the letter L, indicating the currency had been used by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Fran.
So they were marked.
Not marked.
Basically, they got the photographs of each bill.
Yeah, but not marked, where they'll immediately come ringing up if they go through the system. At the same time, though, Seattle police worked together to gather the parachutes. The 2 reserve parachutes came from a local skydiving school, while the 2 main ones were obtained from a local stunt pilot.
Oh.
Thought the lady said they were coming from Air Force Base.
Right.
By late afternoon, authorities had assembled everything Cooper demanded. The ransom, it was ready. The parachutes, they were ready. All attention was now focused on what would happen when Flight 305 finally touched down in Seattle.
Ooh-wee.
About 5:24 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Captain William Scott received word that the parachutes had arrived at the SeaTac Airport. He passed the information along to Cooper and told him they would be landing shortly. About 20 minutes later, 5:46, Flight 305 touched down at SeaTac. With Cooper's approval, Scott taxied the Boeing 727 to a partially lit section of the runway well away from the main terminal. Cooper, he wanted the aircraft isolated from the rest of the airport activity.
Right.
He also laid out very specific instructions for the exchange. Only one airline representative was allowed to approach the aircraft with money and parachutes.
Right.
The only way on or off the plane would be through the front door only, using portable boarding stairs.
Right.
Northwest Airlines selected Seattle operations manager Al Lee to deliver the items. Go ahead, Al.
All right. Lee took extra precaution before approaching the aircraft. He was concerned that Cooper might mistake his airline uniform for law enforcement, so he changed his civilian clothes. With the passengers still seated inside the cabin, a ground crew rode the boarding stairs into place at the front door. Following Cooper's instructions, Tina Mucklow exited the aircraft and collected the bag containing the ransom money. She then carried the bag on board and walked through the cabin, past the waiting passengers, all the way to Cooper in the last row. At this point, Cooper agreed to release the passengers. As the passengers began leaving the aircraft, Cooper opened the bag and inspected the money. During the exchange, Mucklow tried to lighten the mood with a joke. She asked Cooper if she could have some of the ransom money. To her surprise, he immediately agreed. Cooper handed her a packet of bills without hesitation.
Wow. He said, sure, here you go.
Just as quickly, Mucklow handed it right back. She explained that accepting tips was against company policy. According to Mucklow, this was not the first time Cooper had tried to give money away during the flight. Earlier in the hijacking, he attempted to tip her and the other two flight attendants using cash from his own pocket. All three women declined for the same reason.
That's bullshit. Fuck you, airline company, right. First of all.
Right. Even in the middle of a hijacking involving a bomb, a ransom, 4 parachutes, Northwest flight attendants stuck to company policy.
Good for them.
Once the passengers were safely off the aircraft, only Cooper and the 6 crew members were still remained on board. Following his instructions, Tina Mucklow made 3 separate trips outside the aircraft to collect parachutes. Each time she carried them back to Cooper in the rear. While Mucklow was busy bringing the parachutes, Florence Schaffner asked Cooper if she could retrieve her purse, which was stored in a compartment behind his seat. Cooper said, go ahead, and even joked, saying that, I'm not going to bite. Short time later, Flight Attendant Alice Hancock asked the flight attendants, can we leave the aircraft? Cooper, he said, whatever you girls would like. So with that, Hancock and Schaffner exited the plane. Well, that's cool.
Right.
Look at him.
Well, when old Mucklow delivered the 4th and final parachute, she also handed Cooper printed instructions explaining how to use them. Cooper took one look at him and said he didn't need them. At that point, another problem developed. Refueling the aircraft was taking longer than expected. One fuel truck was unable to finish the job, so a second one was brought in.
Yeah.
Then a third.
Oh.
This delay frustrated Cooper. During the wait, he complained that the ransom money had been delivered in a cloth bag instead of the knapsack he specifically requested. Now, he said he had to figure out his own way to carry it.
Uh-oh.
Right. Using a pocket knife, Cooper cut apart one of the reserve parachutes. He removed the canopy and used the empty parachute bag to hold some of the ransom money.
Okay.
Meanwhile, an FAA official requested permission to board the aircraft and meet with Cooper face-to-face, and Cooper said no.
No.
As this delay dragged on, he became increasingly impatient. This shouldn't take so long. Let's get the show on the road. Classic dad, baby.
Right.
This dude's got kids.
Yeah.
With the refueling finally nearing completion, Cooper turned his attention to what would happen after takeoff. He gave the cockpit crew detailed instructions for the next leg of the flight. He wanted the aircraft flown southeast toward Mexico City. He ordered the crew to maintain the slowest airspeed possible without stalling, which is about 100 knots or about 115 miles an hour. He also wanted the plane kept at no more than 10,000 feet, which is standard diving.
Right.
Cooper's instructions became even more specific. He ordered First Officer William Bill Redizik to leave the landing gear down, set the wing flaps at 15 degrees, and keep the cabin unpressurized. Well, Bill explained that flying in that configuration would dramatically reduce the aircraft's range. And in fact, the Boeing 727 would only be able to travel about 1,000 miles before needing more fuel.
Wow.
That meant reaching Mexico City nonstop impossible. After discussing several possibilities, Cooper and the flight crew agreed that Reno Tahoe International Airport in Nevada would be used as the next refueling stop.
Oh, wow.
Cooper then added one more unusual demand. He wanted the aircraft to take off with the rear exit door open and the built-in air stair already lowered. Northwest officials objected immediately, arguing it was unsafe.
Oh, who gives a fuck?
Cooper wasn't impressed. He said, it can be done. Do it.
Right. I can do it.
Eventually, though, he backed off slightly. Instead of requiring the stair to be lowered during takeoff, he said, all right, we'll get up there and I'll lower it myself when we're in the air.
Right.
Finally, Cooper informed the crew that Tina Mucklow would remain on board to assist them during the next phase of the operation. She's like, fuck.
Damn.
About 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off from Seattle once again.
Adios, amigos.
This time, only 5 people on board besides him. Flight attendant Tina Mucklow remained in the cabin with him. And then you got the captain, the first officer, and the flight engineer, Harold Anderson. They stayed in the cockpit.
Okay.
As the Boeing 727 headed south, military aircraft quietly moved in position behind it.
Oh, I bet it did.
2 F-106 fighter jets from McCord Air Force Base were assigned to follow the hijacked airliner. They were joined by a Lockheed T-33 trainer aircraft that had been diverted from an unrelated Air National Guard mission.
Oh.
Because that 727 was flying so slow, all 3 military aircraft flew a series of S-shaped patterns behind it. Had to do those zigzags.
They couldn't go that slow.
This allowed them to stay close enough just to monitor the flight while remaining out of Cooper's view.
Wow.
Not long after that takeoff, Cooper instructed Tina to lower the aircraft's aft air stair. Mucklow, she was terrified.
Wow. She told both Cooper and the flight crew that she was afraid that she could be sucked out of the aircraft if she went near the rear stairs. The crew tried to come up with a solution. Someone suggested that Mucklow come forward to the cockpit and retrieve an emergency rope. She could then tie herself to a seat before attempting to lower the stairs. Cooper, he said, hell no. He did not want Mucklow going to the cockpit at all. He did not want anyone from the cockpit.
Well, they just throw it out.
Coming back into the cabin. Right. Mucklow continued to tell Cooper she was frightened. Hoping to find another solution, she asked if she could cut some cord from one of the parachutes so she could make a safety line for herself. And this time, Cooper gave a different response. He told her he would lower the air stair himself. Then he gave her a final set of instructions. She was to go to the cockpit, close the curtain that separated the coach and the first class sections of the aircraft, and never come back. Mucklow, she did exactly that. For the very first time since the hijacking began, Cooper was now completely alone. Before Tina Mucklow left the cabin, she had one final request for Cooper. Knowing he claimed to have a bomb, she pled with him. Please take the bomb with you. Cooper calmly replied that he would either disarm it or take it with him. As Mucklow walked toward the cockpit, she turned back one last time to close the curtain separating the coach and the first class sections. In that very moment, she caught a final glimpse of D.B. Cooper. He was standing in the aisle, apparently tying the bag containing the ransom money around his waist. About 4 to 5 minutes passed between takeoff and Mucklow entering the cockpit. She never saw D.B. Cooper again.
Well, for the remainder of the flight to Reno, Mucklow stayed in the cockpit with the rest of the crew, making her the last known person to see him. About 8 p.m., a warning light illuminated in the cockpit. The light, it indicated that the aft air stair had been deployed. Captain William Scott and First Officer William Radizik used the aircraft's intercom to contact Cooper and asked if he needed any assistance. Cooper said, nope. Short time later, the crew noticed another sign that the rear exit had been opened. The sudden change in cabin pressure caused their ears to pop. Then, approximately 8:13 p.m., something happened. The tail of the aircraft suddenly pitched upward. The movement was abrupt enough that the pilots had to make control adjustments to bring the Boeing 727 back to level flight.
Wow.
Later, Radizik told FBI investigators that the incident occurred while the aircraft was flying near the northern suburbs of Portland. The crew had no way of knowing exactly what had happened, though. With the rear door open and the air stair hanging below the aircraft, they could only guess whether Cooper was still on board. The flight continued south towards Reno. As the aircraft approached Nevada, Mucklow repeatedly used the intercom to contact Cooper. She informed him that they were nearing Reno and told him he would need to raise the air stair so the aircraft could land safely.
Good luck.
She called out to him more than once. There was no response. As the Flight 305 began its final approach, the silence continued. Nobody in the cockpit heard another word from old D.B. Cooper. About 11:02 p.m., nearly 8 hours after the hijacking had begun, Flight 305 landed at Reno Tahoe International Airport with the air stair still deployed.
Oh, nice.
Authorities had no idea whether Cooper was alive, dead, armed, or still sitting somewhere inside the aircraft. FBI agents, Nevada state troopers, sheriff's deputies, and Reno police quickly surrounded the plane and established a secure perimeter. Because they still believed the bomb might be on board, and nobody rushed inside.
All right.
Eventually, Captain Scott entered the cabin and conducted a search. Cooper, he was gone.
Wow. 30-minute inspection. FBI bomb squad declared aircraft safe. Hijacker who had boarded the plane in Portland as Dan Cooper had vanished somewhere between Seattle and Reno, leaving behind one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. Once investigators were certain Cooper was no longer on the aircraft, the massive manhunt began. FBI agents combed through the Boeing 727 and collected every piece of evidence that they could find. Among the items recovered, 66 latent fingerprints, Cooper's black clip-on tie, the tie clip attached to it, and 2 of the 4 parachutes that had been delivered to the aircraft. One of those parachutes had been open. 3 of its shroud lines had been cut. At the very same time, investigators spread out across Portland, Seattle, and Reno to interview witnesses and gather descriptions of the hijacker. Those interviews were used to create a series of composite sketches that would become some of the most recognizable images in FBI history. Federal and local law enforcement agencies immediately began tracking down possible suspects. Meanwhile, something else happened that would shape the case forever. The hijacker had purchased his ticket under the name Dan Cooper. But in the rush to meet a newspaper deadline, reporter James Long of the Oregon Journal accidentally recorded the name as D.B. Cooper. The mistake was then repeated by the United Press International reporter Clyde Jabin. As other newspapers and radio stations and television outlets picked up the story, the error spread across the country. Look what happens.
It shows how quickly news can be wrong, and it just goes and runs with it. And this is in the 70s.
Before long, almost everyone knew the mysterious hijacker by a name he never used. D.B. Cooper. The nickname stuck and has remained attached to the case ever since.
Investigators, they also explored the possibility that the hijacker had used his real name when buying the ticket.
I doubt it.
Portland police quickly located a local man named D.B. Cooper, interviewed him. Why would they be D.B. Cooper? The man had a minor criminal record, but investigators rapidly determined he had nothing to do with the hijacking, and he was eliminated.
Seeing that he was paralyzed from the waist down.
Right. Why do you have branch scrapings all over your face, sir? The next challenge was figuring out where Cooper had actually left the airplane, where over the sky.
Right.
It turned out to be far more complicated than it sounded.
Well, apparently those military jets wasn't too close to see.
Right. Well, it was dark, though.
Right.
You think they would have like heat vision or night vision or something?
It was America.
It was 70s, though, so did they have that?
No, and you know they did.
That's true, but they couldn't tell us. That's why they couldn't find them with that, so they're like, we can't let them know we have this yet.
Right.
It's another 20 years. Investigators, they knew roughly where the plane had been flying when their aircraft suddenly reacted about 8:30. Wouldn't the radar know? The black box would have...
Yeah, but they don't know when he jumped out.
The aircraft suddenly reacted about 8:13,
right.
And that's when they think he opened the door.
Okay, so from
jump.
From 8:13 on out, you don't know when. You could have just opened the door there and waited. So I guess if you want to take a snap from 8:13 and then head whatever way the plane was flying.
I guess.
But still, it's northwest United States. You're talking dense forest.
A huge number of unknown factors, though, made it difficult to pinpoint exactly where he jumped. The aircraft's exact airspeed estimates, they varied. Weather conditions change along different parts of the flight path. Wind speeds and directions differed depending on altitude and location. And perhaps most importantly, only Cooper knew how long he remained in free fall before opening his parachute.
Right.
The military aircraft and how long if he did open it, when he did, how long he just coasted to go further.
Right.
It's crazy. The military aircraft trailing Flight 305 were unable to provide much help. The pilots of the two F-106 fighter jets never saw anybody jump. The radar systems also failed to detect a deployed parachute.
No shit.
In fairness, though, spotting a man dressed in dark clothing dropping into a moonless night would have been difficult, obviously. Visibility was limited. Clouds covered portions of the sky, and much of the ground below had little or no lighting at all.
Good luck.
The pilots of the Lockheed T-33 trainer, they were unable to help either. They never even made visual contact with the flight at all.
Wow.
The only thing investigators know for certain was that somewhere between Seattle and Reno, a man jumped out of a plane carrying $200,000 and disappeared into the darkness, and nobody knows where he landed, if he landed, or what happened.
Wow.
Crazy.
Well, with no sign of Cooper anywhere, the FBI launched one of the most extensive searches in United States history. 6th of December, 1971, just 12 days after the hijacking.
One day before Pearl Harbor Day.
Right. Disgraced FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover approved an unusual plan. Not for him. The Bureau enlisted a United States Air Force SR-71 Blackbird, one of the fastest aircraft ever built. They wanted to retrace Flight 305's route and photograph the area below in hopes of spotting either Cooper or equipment. SR-71 flew the route 5 separate times. The effort, nothing, very little. Poor visibility made the photographs largely unusable, and nothing connected to the hijacking was found. Investigators also began testing what might have happened aboard the aircraft during the jump. Using the same Boeing 727 involved in hijacking and configuring it exactly as it had been on the night of the 24th of November, agents pushed a 200-pound sled out the back of the aircraft while the plane was in flight. The results were revealing. The experiment recreated both the sudden upward pitch of the aircraft's tail and the brief change in cabin pressure reported by the flight crew at about 8:13 p.m. That gave investigators more confidence that Cooper likely exited aircraft around that time.
Would exiting 200 pounds off of the plane have really made that? Maybe, because
that's a lot. 200 pounds.
Especially when everything's pressurized, right. And yeah, wow.
Early calculations suggest that Cooper's landing area was somewhere on the southern edge of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast. Well, we flew right into the mountain.
Right.
A few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington, near Lake Merwin. The lake had been created by a dam on the Lewis River. Based on those projections, search items.
That Lake Merwin's going to come into play later, by the way.
Search teams concentrated on Clark and Colwitz counties in southwestern Washington. The effort, enormous. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies searched miles of heavily forested terrain on foot and from helis. Teams went door to door at local farmhouses asking residents if they had seen anything unusual. And also, if they had a few seconds to talk about the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Patrol boats searched Lake Merwin and neighboring Yale Lake.
Ironically, they had seen some unusual stuff, but didn't want to talk about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Nothing was ever found. Neither D.B. Cooper nor any of the equipment he was believed to have carried ever turned up. The search soon expanded even further. If it's not there, it's got to be somewhere, right?
Well, this time they used fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters supplied by the Oregon National Guard of the Army. The FBI coordinated aerial searches along the entire flight route, known in aviation as Victor 23 and often referred to in Cooper literature as Vector 23.
Yeah.
Investigators chased every possible lead. Broken tree tops, they were examined. Pieces of plastic were recovered. Objects that appeared to be pieces of parachute canopy, they were investigated. Every promising clue ultimately led nowhere.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
After the winter snow began to melt in early 72, the search resumed on an even larger scale. Now they're like, this is embarrassing. In March, teams of FBI agents joined approximately 200 soldiers from Fort Lewis, along with Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, plus some civilian volunteers for an 18-day ground search across the two counties.
Wow.
Another 18-day search followed in April.
Damn.
At Lake Merwin Electronic Explorations Company, a marine salvage firm, they even deployed a submarine to search waters as deep as 200 feet.
Damn, that's how deep that lake is? Holy shit.
Again, nothing connected to Cooper was found. But one discovery did briefly capture some attention. 2 local women found a skeleton inside an abandoned structure in Clark County. Investigators, though, they identified the remains as Barbara Ann Derry, who was a teenage girl believed to have been abducted and murdered several weeks earlier by Warren Forrest, who was a suspected serial killer.
Holy shit.
So at least I got a cold case solved there, huh? By the end of that massive operation, investigators had recovered no significant evidence related to the hijacking. Again. Meanwhile, estimates of Cooper's landing zone continued to evolve. Well, maybe he went a little further.
You never know.
Jeez.
Wow. Early FBI computer projections, they placed a jump area between the Lewis River Dam to the north and the town of Battleground, Washington to the south. So anywhere in that area. Then, in March of 1972, after a joint investigation involving the FBI, the Northwest Orient Airlines, and the Air Force, what the fuck's the airlines got to do with anything?
So they're playing.
I don't care. Investigators concluded that Cooper probably jumped over La Cente in Washington. Decades later, another curious detail surface. 2019, the FBI released a report describing grocery store burglary that occurred roughly 3 hours after Cooper's jump near Hyzen, Washington. Hyzen sat within a calculated drop zone Northwest Orient Airlines had previously presented to investigators. The burglar had taken only survival-related items, including beef jerky and gloves. Gotta have that beef jerky. At first glance, that sounded intriguing. But the report also noted the burglar was wearing military-style boots with corrugated soles. Cooper, he had described throughout the hijacking, was wearing slip-on shoes. He had some slides on.
Yeah, but maybe
right,
he knew where he was going to land and had a little stash somewhere.
Right. Like so many leads in the case, it was interesting, but far from conclusive. The deeper investigators searched, the more the mystery grew.
Don't you hate that?
As the search for Cooper continued, investigators, they launched a worldwide effort to track the ransom money.
Yeah.
And about a month after the hijacking, the FBI distributed lists containing the serial numbers of every ransom bill. The lists were sent to banks, casinos, racetracks, businesses that regularly handled large amounts of cash, law enforcement agencies across the United States and around the world. Northwest Orient Airlines.
See, technically they didn't track it, so it wouldn't have been discovered right away. So they counted on these guys to be looking at serial numbers of every single bill. Like, come on, man.
The airlines company added another incentive. They offered a reward equal to 15% of any recovered ransom money, up to a maximum payout of $25,000. That's cool. When months pass without any results. I mean, come on, you got money involved. You think somebody's going to give you something?
Right.
The government widened the search even further. Early 1972, United States Attorney General John Mitchell released serial numbers to the general public.
Damn, they're desperate.
They're hoping ordinary citizens just might unknowingly encounter one of the bills. And they're going to know where they got it. The publicity generated plenty of attention, but not much progress.
At one point, though, 2 con artists printed counterfeit $20 bills bearing Cooper serial numbers and used them to scam a Newsweek reporter named Carl Fleming.
Oh, that dude's looking for a story.
The men convinced him they could arrange an interview with the hijacker and managed to swindle him out of $30,000 before the scheme unraveled. What an idiot this guy is.
Yeah, because that Carl Fleming would have got triple that.
The real ransom money remained missing, clearly. By early 73, frustration was growing even more. The Oregon Journal decided to republish the serial numbers and offered another $1,000 reward to the first person who turned in an authentic Cooper ransom bill to either the newspaper or an FBI office.
Right.
Not long afterwards, Seattle Post's Intelligencer launched a similar campaign. They offered $5,000.
Damn. Offered 200. Dude, so this has got to be bigger than just $200,000.
It is.
This is insane.
It's national security.
I guess.
Dude just disappeared off of a hijacked plane.
Right. Right.
And made the FBI look like idiots.
Little to no effort.
Right. Right.
And even stopped the refueled while the agents were sitting outside the plane.
Well, he had the bomb in the passenger still.
Did he?
Well,
was it actually a real bomb?
I don't know.
We found out.
He took it with him. I guess we'll get to that part, won't we? Both newspapers, they received reports from people who believed they had found matching bills, but
how do you not know? You got the fucking numbers right there.
I think this is it. No, sir. The bills we're looking for start with an L. This is a fucking F.
Right. And first of all, no.
This is not even American money. All those reward offers, they stayed active until Thanksgiving of 74, but no verified ransom bills surfaced.
Just Thanksgiving, huh? They couldn't even end out the year 1974.
It was the day before Thanksgiving that it happened. Years, they're now passing. The money still had not appeared anywhere in circulation.
Good luck.
Then came another major development. In 1975, Northwest Orient Airlines finally recovered part of its financial loss when its insurer, Global Indemnity Company, they complied with an order from the Minnesota Supreme Court and paid the airline's claim, which totaled $180,000. Now they're out of it. They don't care no more.
All right.
Even though that money dispute had been settled, the larger mystery remained exactly where it had been that night before Thanksgiving in 71. We got no hijacker. Every one of the $10,000 $20 bills are vanished. And investigators, they continue studying the evidence. They realize one of the biggest assumptions in the case might have been wrong. The original estimate of Cooper's landing zone was based on the best information available immediately after the hijacking. But later analysis suggested calculations were off. Captain William Scott, who had been hand flying the Boeing 727 because of Cooper's specific speed and altitude requirements, he concluded the aircraft's actual flight path was farther east than originally reported.
How many pilots can fly a 727 at that low of speed?
I would assume everybody.
I don't know about it.
You would have to be able to.
You got to be pretty good pilot to do that.
I think you would have to be able to, right?
I don't know how many times.
That would be your training.
How often you flying 1,000 feet above ground?
Oh, it was more than 1,000 feet. It was 10,000 feet.
Yeah, 10,000 feet. But it's still only going a third of the speed.
He did it. Another important piece of information came from Continental Airlines pilot Tom Bohan. Bohan, he had been flying an aircraft about 4 minutes behind Flight 305 on the same route. Oh, what if he got sucked into the fucking... right? I would say not. After reviewing the FBI's calculations, he noticed a significant problem. The Buru's estimate of Cooper's jump location had been based on incorrectly recorded wind direction.
Oh, of course it was. Even though they went back and forth and double-checked their numbers.
If the wind... Isn't this all this information recorded on the airplane?
You think?
In the 70s? I don't know how good their data was, but you would think. If the wind data was wrong, then the projected landing zone would be wrong as well, clearly. Using Bohan's observations with additional flight path analysis, investigators, they recalculated where he likely left the aircraft. And that shifted the probable drop zone eastward into that's the river I was talking about, not the lake, the Washagal River watershed. For many investigators, that revised location seemed far more likely than I'm sure it does.
Right. They're like, no, this makes sense. Jeez. In fact, FBI Special Agent Ralph Himmelsbach, one of the most closely associated investigators in the case, he wrote in 1986, I have to confess,
I'm D.B. Cooper.
If I were going to look for Cooper, I would head for the Washagal. Authorities did exactly that. The Washagal Valley and the surrounding countryside were searched repeatedly over and over and over again over the years. Teams returned again and again, hoping to find a parachute, piece of equipment, clothing, money, something. But they never did. Despite decades of searching, no discovery from the Washoe area has ever been conclusively linked to the hijacking. Today, FBI believes another factor may have permanently erased whatever evidence remained.
Oh, right.
Because in 1980 in May, Mount St. Helens, guess what? Erupted, one of the most destructive volcanic events in American history. The eruption devastated huge portions of southwestern Washington, burying forests, waterways, entire landscapes beneath ash, mud flows, and debris.
Dude, yeah, that could have fucked everything.
Investigators also believe that if any physical evidence ever were to be out there from Cooper's jump, there's a good chance it was destroyed or buried during that eruption.
Even if he did die,
right,
you'd never find him.
Right, and by that point, nearly a decade had passed since the hijacking. The search area changed multiple times. Theories changed multiple times. Result always the same. Nobody knows where or who D.B. Cooper is.
Well, after 45 years chasing leads and burying souls and digging holes, investigating suspects, analyzing evidence, and searching the forests and mountains of the Pacific Northwest, the FBI finally reached a decision. And this is how we know Bigfoot doesn't exist either, because they searched the whole Pacific Northwest, and not one instance of Bigfoot.
Right.
July 8, 2016, the Buru officially announced that the active investigation of the D.B. Cooper case is being suspended.
That don't mean anything. That could have been easily Bigfoot, but they ain't. That's not the case on hand right now.
Yeah, but you think they would have said something?
Just wait till the more declassified fucking alien files come out.
Well, he's not an alien. We need declassified Bigfoot fucking documents. July 8, 2016, the Bureau officially announced that the active investigation of the D.B. Cooper case was being suspended.
I bet.
The reason, pretty simple. The FBI stated that its investigators and resources, they needed to refocus on cases that presented more immediate and urgent priorities.
Right.
They're like, we don't care now.
Yeah, fuck it.
Didn't mean the case was completely closed, though.
Yeah.
The FBI said local field offices would continue accepting any credible physical evidence that might surface.
They'll solve it one of these years when they need a case.
Right. They say, we want evidence connected to the parachutes or the ransom money, basically. If someone does discover a verified piece of the equipment from the jump or additional ransom bills, the Bureau, they would examine it. You would be dumb not to.
Right.
But the large-scale investigation that had consumed decades of effort was over. By that point, the Cooper investigation had generated an enormous amount of material. The case file eventually grew to 66 volumes, documenting nearly half a century of interviews, forensic examinations, search operations, suspect investigations, and some public tips. Probably a lot of those.
Yeah.
Rather than lock those records away, the FBI preserved them for historical purposes. The files are maintained at the FBI headquarters in Washington, and much of the material has been made available to the public through the FBI's website.
Oh, look at that shit. Well, evidence, reports, witness statements, countless theories. They remain open for anyone willing to dig.
That's what they're hoping for in the age of the people doing the shit.
Right.
Somebody will find something.
What investigators never found was the answer. No one ever proved who Cooper was. No one ever determined with certainty whether he even survived the jump. No one ever recovered the vast majority of the ransom money. And no one ever discovered exactly what happened after a man called himself Dan Cooper. He stepped off the back of a Boeing 727 in the darkness on the night before Thanksgiving in 1971. 4 decades after the crime, the FBI said, we're done. The mystery, however, still there. To this very day, D.B. Cooper, his hijacking stands as the only documented unsolved case of air piracy in the history of commercial aviation.
That's crazy.
Wow. Despite decades of investigation, only a handful of physical items could be directly connected to Cooper. And during their forensic examination of Flight 305, FBI agents recovered 4 major pieces of evidence. Cooper's black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, a hair recovered from the hardest of his seat. What?
That hair got to the hardest part of the seat.
There was a piece of hair that was recovered from the headrest of his seat, and also 8 filter-tipped Raleigh cigarette butts found in the ashtray attached to the armrest.
They said he was a chain smoker. I mean, 8 cigarettes, and
that's not that many.
They were on the flight for like fucking 8 hours. Right. That's not that many at all.
You should,
not for a chain smoker.
Not somebody committing a crime too.
Right.
He's going to be smoking like a bitch.
Which they said he was calm, but the hair recovered.
Right. The tie quickly became one of the most important pieces of evidence. Why? Investigators found it in C-18E, where Cooper had been sitting throughout the hijacking. Attached to it was a gold tie clip, as we said. The FBI eventually determined that the tie had been sold exclusively through JCPenney department stores. However, the model had been discontinued in 1968, several years before the hijacking. And for decades, the tie...
And how many guys got ties for Father's Day every year? That was probably that same exact one.
Right. And for decades, the tie sat in evidence. And then, advances in forensic technology gave investigators another opportunity. 2001, scientists collected DNA samples from the tie. By late 2007, the FBI developed a partial DNA profile from the material they recovered. Even so, investigators remained cautious about the results actually meant. According to FBI Special Agent Fred Gutt, the tie contained 2 small DNA samples, 1 larger sample. Because multiple people may have handled the tie over the years, the FBI acknowledged that no evidence definitively connected Cooper himself to the DNA source. And as Gutt explained, drawing from conclusions from the samples, very difficult. I don't know. Around that very same time, the FBI released additional case material to the public, including Cooper's airline ticket, previously unreleased. Wow. Updated fact sheets, and also requests for information that might help identify the hijacker. And then, in 2009, a new group entered the picture. A collection of independent researchers known as the Cooper Research Team, or CRT. They began re-examining evidence using technologies that did not exist when the hijacking occurred in 1971. And the group included Burke Museum paleontologist Tom Kay, scientific illustrator Carol Abrazinkas, computer scientist Sean Christo, and metallurgist Alan Stone.
He's a metal guy.
Yep, the team used GPS technology, satellite imagery, advanced microscopy.
That's what it is, right?
And modern analytical methods to study evidence from the case.
Although they uncovered little that helped explain Cooper's landing zone or the fate of the ransom money, they made an intriguing discovery while examining the tie, though. Using electron microscopy, the CRT identified hundreds of microscopic, I would assume so, particles trapped within the fabric.
All right.
Among them were lycopodium spores, which the researchers believe may have originated from pharmaceutical materials. Even more interesting were the metallic particles embedded in the tie, which they identified tiny traces of pure titanium, along with particles of bismuth, antimony, cerium, strontium sulfide, aluminum, and titanium antimony alloys. Isn't that like everything?
Right.
That would be in like everything.
Right.
These findings led researchers to speculate about Cooper's occupation.
Ooh, what was he?
The unusual combination of metals suggested he may have worked for Boeing or another aerospace engineering company.
Oh.
Other possibilities include employment as a chemical manufacturing facility guy or a metal fabrication plant.
Anybody then.
So they don't know.
Right.
According to Tom Kay, the most significant discovery was the presence of unalloyed titanium. Today, pure titanium is common in many industries, but in the early 70s, it was far more specialized. Kay argues that someone regularly exposed to pure titanium, they were likely working in aircraft manufacturing or at a chemical facility where titanium and aluminum were used to store highly corrosive substances.
Okay.
Other particles, they provided additional clues. Cerium and strontium sulfide, they were materials associated with Boeing's supersonic transport development program.
Uh-oh.
They were also used in Portland area factories that manufactured cathode ray tubes, including facilities operated by Teledyne and Tektronix. Some researchers have gone even further. Cooper researcher Eric Ulis, he suggested the titanium antimony particles may point toward Rem Crew Titanium Incorporated, which is a metals manufacturer that supplied materials to Boeing.
Uh-oh.
But none of these discoveries identified Cooper.
But they did offer something investigators had struggled to find for decades. A possible glimpse into the government where he worked before he...
The government?
A possible glimpse into
That's probably the right.
A possible glimpse into the environment where he worked before he ever boarded a plane. For a case built largely on theories, the tie remains one of the few pieces of evidence that can still be physically examined, and one of the few places where new clues continue to emerge. The tie was not only physical evidence recovered from Cooper's seat. FBI agents found 2 hair samples. One was a single strand of limb hair found on the seat itself. The other was a single strand of brown Caucasian head hair recovered from the headrest. At first, investigators hoped the hairs might someday help identify the hijacker. That hope quickly diminished for one of the samples. After examining the limb hair, specialists at the FBI crime laboratory concluded it did not contain enough distinctive microscopic characteristics to be useful for comparison purposes. As a result, sample was destroyed. Oh, wow.
Why would you destroy that?
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Well, the head hair appeared more promising. Laboratory personnel determined that the strand was suitable for future comparison work, so instead of discarding it, they carefully preserved the hair on a microscope slide and retained it as evidence. And for years, that single strand remained one of the few pieces of biological evidence that could potentially link Cooper. Then came another frustrating setback. 2002, while attempting to build a DNA profile connected to the case, FBI investigators went looking for the preserved hair. Guess what? Gone. Somewhere during the decades between the hijacking and the DNA investigation, the hair lost.
Gone.
Wow.
The hair's gone. Somewhere during the decades between the hijacking and the DNA investigation, the hair been lost. One of the most potentially valuable pieces of evidence in the entire case, simply gone. Unfortunately, and not the only important item that vanished either. Investigators, they also recovered 8 Raleigh filter tip cigarette butts from the ashtray built into the armrest of seat 18E.
Full of DNA.
Because Cooper had been smoking throughout the flight, the cigarette butts were obviously significant evidence. The FBI crime laboratory examined them, hoping to find some fingerprints.
Good luck.
No effort produced nothing useful. No identifiable fingerprints recovered. After the examination, the cigarette butts were returned to the FBI's Las Vegas field office. Years later, we got advancement in DNA technology where they're like, well, let's go take a look at them. 1998 rolls around, investigators, they attempt to locate the butts, but guess what? They'd been destroyed while in the custody of the Las Vegas field office.
Oh, my goodness.
That's just not, I mean...
That's just ridiculous. Too many evidence.
That's not a coincidence.
There's 3 of them now. That's the tie.
Well, the tie they got, but they couldn't figure out nothing useful on that, so they threw it away.
Right.
But then the hair, and then this comes up missing, and one's destroyed. It remains one of the most frustrating aspects of the Cooper investigation, people say. Preserved head hair, gone. Cigarette butts, destroyed.
I mean...
Decades later, when DNA technology finally became capable of finding stuff they could only dream about in 1971, some of the best evidence is gone.
Ridiculous.
For more than 8 years after the hijacking, though, investigators found nothing that could be definitively connected to D.B. Cooper outside of the aircraft and the stuff they found on it. Then, February 10th, 1980, everything changed with that. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family along the Columbia River at a spot known as Tina Bar, sometimes spelled Tina Bar. T-I-T-E. The location sat about 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington, and roughly 20 miles southwest of Ariel.
Not even close where they were looking.
That's a river.
Right. Oh, yeah.
When building a campfire on the sandy riverbank, O'Brien used a rake to clear away some sand. Instead of finding some driftwood or some rocks or some shells or something, he uncovered money.
Oh.
Buried beneath the surface were 3 packets of cash from Cooper's ransom. Together, it contained about $5,800. Bills that are in rough shape, years of exposure to the elements had caused them to deteriorate badly. Even so, the money was still wrapped in the original rubber bands that held it together. FBI technicians quickly examined the bills, and they 100% confirmed they were genuine ransom money from the hijacking.
Oh, man.
Oh, shit. 8 years, huh?
Well, that find consisted of 2 bundles containing $120 bills each. A third bundle containing 90 $20 bills. Even more remarkable, the bills remained arranged in the same sequence that they had been when authorities handed the ransom over to Cooper. Discovery immediately reignited interest in the case. Unfortunately, it created a new set of mysteries. At first, investigators assumed the money had simply just washed downstream through the Columbia River system. A hydrologist from United States Army Corps of Engineers examined the bill and noted that they had deteriorated in a rounded, matted pattern. In his opinion, the bundles appeared to have been deposited by the river action rather than intentionally buried. Makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
This interpretation seemed to support the theory that Cooper landed somewhere near the Washoe River, which empties into the Columbia upstream from Tina Bar. If this is true, the discovery weakened earlier theories involving Lake Merwin, the Lewis River, or even tributaries further downstream.
Right.
But the more investigators studied the evidence, the less straightforward it got. One problem involved the money itself. 10 bills were missing from one of the bundles. Another problem was even harder to explain. If that money had broken away from the rest of the ransom and floated downstream naturally, how had the 3 bundles remained together all those years?
Especially with that rubber band.
Then there's the issue of the rubber bands.
Rubber bands are notoriously notorious for dry rotting.
Right. Former lead investigator Ralph Himmelschbach, he pointed out that the freely floating bundles would likely have washed ashore within a few years of the hijacking. Otherwise, the rubber bands should have deteriorated long before 1980. Geological evidence complicated things even further. The Army Corps of Engineers, they had dredged part of that river near Tina Bar in 1974.
Oh.
And geologist Leonard Palmer of Portland State University, he later examined the layers of sediment at the discovery site and found 2 distinct layers of sand and sediment between the dredged material and the layer where the ransom money was buried. Oh. His conclusion? Significant. The bills appear to have arrived at Tina Bar sometime after 1974 dredging operation had already been completed. Well, there's that. This meant that the money had not been sitting there since 1971. To this very day, the Tina Bar money remains the only confirmed physical evidence from the hijacking ever discovered outside the aircraft.
That's crazy. The parachutes Cooper selected became another major focus. During the hijacking, he demanded 4 parachutes in total, 2 main, 2 reserves. The reserve parachutes came from a local skydiving school, while the main ones were supplied by a local pilot named Norman Hayden. All 4 of them had been packed by parachute rigger Earl Cassie. Well, Cassie later explained that the 2 main parachutes were emergency bailout rigs rather than the sport parachutes commonly used by recreational skydivers.
Okay.
He described them as being more similar to military parachutes. Once the ripcord was pulled, they were designed to deploy immediately and could not be steered.
All right.
Oh, so you're just dropping.
All right.
When Flight 305 landed in Reno, investigators quickly took inventory of what Cooper had left behind. They discovered 2 of the 4 parachutes still on the aircraft. One was a reserve, one was a main.
Mm-hmm.
The reserve parachute had been opened, and he cut the lines, to wrap the money in them. But the other one, though, the main one, remained completely intact and unused.
Okay.
The unused main parachute was identified by investigators as Model NB6 or Navy Backpack 6. Today, that is displayed at the Washington State Historical Society Museum.
Oh.
One detail, though, about the reserve parachute soon caught investigators' attention. One of the reserve rigs Cooper received was not actually usable for a jump at all.
Oh.
It was a training parachute intended strictly for classroom demonstration.
Oh,
so
no.
they fucked him over. According to Cassie, the canopy inside had been sewn shut. The purpose was to allow student skydivers to practice pulling a ripcord without parachuting actually deploying.
Oh.
In other words, it was essentially a dummy parachute.
No.
The FBI immediately found that interesting because the non-functional reserve parachute was missing when the aircraft landed in Reno.
Oh.
Some investigators believe that if Cooper had been an inexperienced parachutist, he would have recognized almost immediately that the reserve parachute was a training model.
Okay.
That led to some agents to speculate he might not even been as knowledgeable about parachuting as many assumed before.
Mm.
But also, as usual, there's another possibility. Within days of the hijacking, the FBI disclosed that neither the parachute harness Cooper received contained the D-rings necessary to attach a reserve parachute to the main harness anyway, so he wouldn't have used it.
Right. Wow.
That meant the dummy reserve parachute could not have been functioned as a true backup parachute regardless. So if Cooper could not properly wear it as a reserve, why was it missing?
All right.
Obviously, nobody knows. Earl Cassie believed Cooper likely cut out the sewn-together canopy and used the empty parachute container as an extra bag for carrying the ransom money.
Possibly.
Interestingly, Flight Attendant Tina Mucklow's observations seem to support it. We already know she said she saw him doing that.
Right.
If Cassie's right, Cooper may have never even intended to use a dummy parachute at all. Well, clearly.
Wow. Years later, another possible clue. November 1978, 7 years after hijacking, a deer hunter made an unexpected discovery in Washington State. He was near a logging road about 13 miles east of Castle Rock, Washington. He found a construction placard from a Boeing 727. The placard contained instructions for lowering the aircraft's aft air stair. The location was significant.
Oh.
It sat just north of Lake Merwin, but still fell within the general flight path of 305. The find was intriguing because the aft air stair played a central role in Cooper's escape. Whether the placard actually came from Flight 305 or was somehow connected to the hijacking has remained a subject of debate, but it was one of the very few physical objects discovered outside the aircraft that appeared potentially related to Cooper. Like so much else in this very case, it offers another clue without providing a definitive answer. To this very day, people think D.B. Cooper. It is usually that final revised Composite B sketch they are seeing.
So it's probably the one we have up on.
Out of all the sketches created during the investigation, it remains the FBI's best approximation of the man boarded Flight 305, demanding $200,000 and disappearing into the night. The FBI also concluded that Cooper was unusually familiar with the Boeing 727. In fact, investigators believe that the aircraft itself was a major reason he selected Flight 305. Well, at that very time, in 1971, the Boeing 727 possessed a future. It was only found on virtually no other commercial passenger jet. It had a built-in aft air stair at the rear of the aircraft, combined with the placement of 3 engines. That design made it one of the only airliners from which a parachute could actually jump.
Right, you don't want to be jumping and then get sucked into the damn engine.
Right. From the earliest days of the investigation, FBI leaned toward just one conclusion. D.B. Cooper probably didn't survive. Yeah. This belief is based on several factors, including what investigators viewed as his limited parachuting experience, the equipment he carried, the weather conditions, the rugged terrain, the apparent lack of an escape plan, and the single fact that almost none of the ransom money ever resurfaced. The first issue, Cooper's level of parachute knowledge. For years, many people assumed the hijacker must have been an expert or even military. The FBI eventually moved away from that idea. He said, we would conclude after a few years, this is not the case. No experienced parachutist would even have jumped in the pitch black of night, in the rain, with a 172-mile-an-hour wind in his face, wearing loafers and a trench coat.
That's probably true.
Just too risky. Not everybody agreed, though. Parachute rigger Earl Cossey, who's applied to parachutes, believed that survival, it was very possible. He argued that Cooper did not even need extraordinary experience. In his view, someone with only 6 or 7 practice jumps, they could have done it. Even so, Cossey acknowledged that jumping at night dramatically increased the danger. He also pointed out that Cooper was not wearing proper jump boots, and likely would have suffered serious ankle or leg injuries when he landed, though. Yeah. The second concern involved Cooper's equipment. Investigators noted that he neither brought nor requested a helmet. He also jumped from an aircraft flying at 10,000 feet in conditions that exposed him to an estimated wind temperature of 15 degrees below zero. Ooh. Complicating matters even further, nobody knows exactly what Cooper was wearing when he exited the aircraft. Witnesses saw him board wearing a business suit, trench coat, loafers. The FBI considered that he had additional gear with him somewhere.
Maybe.
Throughout the hijacking, Cooper carried a brown bag that witnesses described as being a few inches tall and slightly smaller than his case that he had. He never opened it or even used the bag. Because of that, investigators speculated it may have contained equipment intended for the jump, possibly boots, gloves, goggles, or other survival gear. The third issue involved an escape plan. The FBI found no evidence that anyone was waiting on the ground. A coordinated pickup would have been extremely difficult to arrange. To make a plan work, the accomplice would need to know exactly where and when Cooper intended to jump, but Cooper never gave the flight crew a precise route to follow. In fact, his plans changed during the hijacking because they had to go get gas again because they were like, dude, we're flying too low and we're going to go through so much gas. He's like, fuck, we'll stop in Reno. When the pilots explained that the aircraft would not reach Mexico City without refueling, Cooper agreed, stop in Reno. And that meant any hypothetical accomplice was no way of knowing that the revised plan was ever in place, and he would just been sitting there forever. Still there today. The weather made things even worse. Cloud cover blocked much of the ground below. Poor visibility. And DB, he would have had a great difficulty determining an exact location or even spotting the landing zone. And finally, the money. Aside from the small amount discovered at Tina Bar in 1980, none of the ransom money was ever discovered. No bank deposits, no suspicious spending, no major purchases with the serial numbers. Nothing. To many investigators, that fact was significant.
Yeah, because if he did survive and escaped with nearly $200,000, they reason that maybe some of it should have eventually have appeared somewhere. Larry Carr summarized the FBI's skepticism bluntly. Diving into the wilderness without the plan, without the right equipment, in such terrible conditions, he probably never even got a chute open. Don't underestimate DB, but another investigator, FBI agent Richard Tosaw, he put forward an even more specific theory. He said he believed Cooper landed in the Columbia River and drowned. Despite those conditions or conclusions, the case remains open to interpretation. No body, no parachute, no definitive evidence ever came up that Cooper landed, died, survived. And because no one knows exactly where he might have landed, no one can say with certainty what happened after he disappeared into the darkness if he did land.
Right.
The FBI, they may have believed the odds were against them, but more than 50 years later, the question remains unanswered. Did DB die during the jump? Did he pull off one of the most successful escapes in American history? Not everybody in the FBI agrees that Cooper died, though. In fact, some investigators believed he very likely survived. Very likely. One senior FBI agent, speaking anonymously in 1976 with the Seattle Times, he offered a dramatically different assessment. I think he made it. I think he slept in his own bed that night. Okay. The agent urged that many of the assumptions surrounding Cooper's death were based on search areas that later proved questionable in the first place. It was a clear night.
It was raining.
Apparently not. Some people are lying. It was a clear night. A lot of the country is pretty flat, he said. He could have just walked out right down the road. Hell, they weren't even looking for him there at the time.
Right.
They thought he was somewhere else. He could just walk down the road. That is true, because
1971.
they ended up looking in a completely different spot.
Right.
As time passed, several real-world examples gave additional support to the survival theory. In the months following Cooper's hijacking, 5 copycat hijackers attempted similar crimes.
Oh.
Every single one of them survived their parachute escape.
No shit.
Former lead investigator Ralph Himmelsbach frequently pointed to 3 particularly notable examples. First one was Martin McNally. McNally jumped from an aircraft at night over Indiana using only a reserve parachute and wearing no protective equipment.
No shit.
Unlike Cooper, who had appeared comfortable with handling parachutes, McNally actually had to be shown how to put his parachute on before making the jump.
Ooh.
His circumstances were arguably even more dangerous than Cooper's.
Yeah.
The pilot of McNally's aircraft increased speed to approximately 320 knots, which is nearly twice of what D.B. Cooper's flight was going when it jumped. The force of the wind immediately ripped the ransom bag away from McNally. Despite the violent exit, he survived with nothing worse than scratches and bruises. Let's see. Dude lost his money, though.
Right. Another example, Frederick Hanneman. Hanneman hijacked a Boeing 727 in Pennsylvania, later jumped from the aircraft at night into a jungle in Honduras.
Honduras, damn.
Yeah, he ended up surviving. And then there's Richard LaPointe. LaPointe hijacked a Boeing 727 in Nevada and jumped into the freezing January air over northern Colorado.
Oh, wow.
That's stupid. He was wearing only trousers, a shirt, and cowboy boots. He landed in the snow and survived. Those cases forced investigators to rethink their assumptions. Even Himmelsbach eventually reconsidered his position. Years earlier, he was skeptical of Cooper's being alive. But by 2008, he admitted, it's possible, I guess, whatever.
Right. I guess. You never know.
He said that when the hijacking first occurred, he estimated Cooper's survival chances at about 50%. After studying later evidence.
That's a coin flip, guy.
Right. After studying later evidence and comparing Cooper's jump to those of the copycats, he revised that assessment. He said, 50.8. And that shift led some investigators to a new theory. Perhaps ODB survived that jump, but lost the ransom money during the descent.
Or maybe like the one guy that had the money ripped away from him when he jumped, that one bundle that they found blew out.
Right. Wow. Such a scenario could explain why so little of the money was ever recovered. Meanwhile, another issue was becoming increasingly important. Time. As the years had passed, legal experts began debating what would happen even if Cooper were eventually identified. By 1976, many legal analysis, they focused on the approaching statute of limitations. Some observers assumed the expiration of the statute would effectively grant Cooper immunity. Others, they said, oh, hell no. He hijacked a freaking an aircraft. That's federal, baby. Legal scholars pointed out that statute of limitations can be interpreted differently depending on the specific circumstances. Prosecutors could potentially argue that Cooper had forfeited any protection under several valid legal theories. Federal authorities decided not to leave the question unresolved. November 1976, a federal grand jury in Portland returned an indictment in absentia against John Doe, or a.k.a. Dan Cooper. The charges included...
Oh, that means we already indicted him, so it doesn't matter if it takes 40 fucking years or 2 years. This boy can still be charged.
Got him. The charges include air piracy and violations of the Hobbs Act. Ooh. The indictment served as an important purpose. It will ensure that the hijacker was to ever be identified and captured. Prosecutors, they could still charge him regardless of how much time had passed. In other words, fuck you, statute of limitations. Right. The government was making one thing clear. Whether D.B. Cooper was alive or dead, the case against him is awaiting in court, baby.
And then there's some suspects that arose over these many years afterwards. The FBI examined more than 1,000 of these guys as serious suspects as well. Some were legitimate leads. Others were publicity seekers looking for attention. Still, others, there were people identified through deathbed confessions that ultimately couldn't be verified. Among all the names associated with the case, one of the most intriguing was Theodore Burdett Braden Jr., known as Ted Braden. He was a highly decorated Special Forces soldier, an elite parachutist, a Vietnam War veteran, and a convicted felon. Many members of the Special Forces community believed he was a strong candidate for D.B. Cooper, both at the time of the hijacking and in the many years that followed.
Really?
On paper, Braden seemed to check many of the boxes investigators associated with Cooper. Born in Ohio, 1928, Braden joined the military in 1944 when he was only 16.
Oh.
During war, how'd that happen?
Right.
World War II, he served with the 101st Airborne Division, which is, if you guys know anything about that, it's like the most elite division of airborne guys. Over the years, he developed a reputation as one of the military's most accomplished parachutists. He frequently represented the U.S. Army, Air Force, in international skydiving competitions, and his military records credited him with astonishing 911 parachute jumps.
Wow.
By the 1960s, he had become a team leader within the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. That group was one of the most secretive units of the Vietnam War.
Okay.
The Green Beret commandos assigned to it carried out unconventional warfare missions and covert operations throughout Southeast Asia that would probably force them to jump in conditions probably way more rough than what D.B. Cooper just did.
Oh, hell yeah.
Braden's responsibilities included serving as a military parachuting instructor. He taught high-altitude military parachuting techniques, known as halo jumping, to members of Project Delta, who are some badass mofos.
Oh.
During his military career, he spent 23 months in Vietnam and participated in classified operations not only in South Vietnam, but also in North Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia.
Oh.
Then his career took an unexpected turn.
December 1966, he deserted his unit in Vietnam. Rather than returning home, he traveled to the Congo, worked briefly as a mercenary.
Oh.
The adventure did not last long there. CIA agents eventually located him. They arrested him and returned
Yeah, they were like, this dude's too fucking dangerous.
Right.
A lot of guys will let you go, but this guy knows a lot.
He returned back home to face court-martial. Under normal circumstances, desertion during wartime could carry extremely severe penalties, including the possibility of death. Yet Braden received an unusually favorable outcome. In exchange for maintaining secrecy about the MACV SOG, the MACSOG, and its classified activities, he was granted an honorable discharge. You think they would just killed him? The agreement was also barred from him from re-enlisting in the military.
I mean, okay.
He's like, I'm good. His reputation for risk taken only grew after he left the service. October 1967, Braden was profiled in Ramparts magazine. The article was written by fellow Special Forces veteran and journalist Donald Duncan. Duncan described Braden as a man with what he called a secret death wish. Someone who routinely put himself in dangerous situations that most people would avoid. I laugh in the face of danger. Yeah. According to Duncan, Brady regularly ignored military parachute and safety regulations and seemed to thrive on that risk. Despite repeatedly placing himself in harm's way, he always seemed to escape serious consequences. Duncan also claimed that during his time in Vietnam, Braden was continuously involved in shady deals just to make a little couple extra bucks. The observation caught the attention of later Cooper researchers because it aligned with another aspect of the FBI's profile of the hijacker, a man who may have been under financial pressure, and he was a man willing to take extraordinary risks to solve that financial pressure problem.
To Cooper theorists, Ted Braden offered a compelling combination of traits: expert parachutist, military aviation experience. He was comfortable operating in secrecy, had a history of unconventional behavior, and he demonstrated a willingness to abandon the rules when it suited him.
Okay.
Whether any of that actually connected him to the hijacking is another question entirely. But among the hundreds of names that crossed investigators' desks over the decades, Ted, he remained one of the most intriguing and frequently discussed suspects in the D.B. Cooper mystery. What makes him particularly interesting as a Cooper suspect is what happened after he left the military. Unfortunately, very little was known about much of his post-service life. But by the time D.B. Cooper hijacking in November of 71, Braden, he was working as a truck driver for Consolidated Freightways. That detail immediately caught the attention of later researchers because the company was headquartered in Vancouver, Washington, which is directly across the Columbia River from Portland and not far from the area around Ariel, where investigators eventually focused much of their attention. Braden, he was also no stranger to criminal investigations. In the early 70s, the FBI investigated him for allegedly masterminding a trucking fraud involving approximately $250,000. Although he was investigated, no charges were ever filed in that case. His legal troubles didn't end there, though. In 1980, a federal grand jury indicted Braden for transporting an 18-wheeler loaded with stolen goods from Arizona all the way to Massachusetts. Whether that case resulted in a conviction remains unclear. We just don't know. 2 years later, though, he was arrested in Pennsylvania after being caught driving a stolen vehicle with fictitious license plates, while also lacking a valid driver's license. Oh, jeez. At some point during the late 80s, Braden was sent to federal prison and served time in Pennsylvania. For what exactly, we don't know for some reason. People who knew Braden often described him as a complicated figure. Although widely respected for his military abilities, he was apparently not especially well liked on a personal level. One family member later described him as the perfect combination of high intelligence and criminality. For Cooper researchers, that description has always been difficult to ignore. Braden possessed many of the characteristics investigators believed the hijacker would have to be crazy enough to jump out of a frickin' plane in the middle of nowhere. His background in covert military operations likely exposed him to information unavailable to most civilians. Researchers have speculated that through his service, Braden may have known details about Boeing 727 operations, including how and under what conditions a jump from the aircraft could be performed. Some theorists have even suggested he may have participated in similar airborne operations during classified missions, though there's no evidence that proves that claim, obviously. Physically, Braden also compared surprisingly well with witness descriptions of Cooper. Military records list him at about 5 feet 8, which is somewhere shorter than the 5'10" to 6 feet range they estimated that Cooper was. But military measurements would have been taken barefoot, and some researchers argue he may have appeared taller while wearing shoes, clearly. Other characteristics they align more closely, though. Braden had a dark complexion from years spent outdoors during military service, short dark hair, he possessed a medium athletic build, and perhaps most notably, he was 43 years old at the time of the hijacking, which places him squarely within the age range consistently estimated by witnesses. Taken together, the similarities, they're striking. He was an elite military parachutist, a veteran of covert operations, a man familiar with risk and loved taking them, a man with history of criminal behavior, and he was a resident of the Pacific Northwest. He was a man whose appearance matched many aspects of D.B. Cooper. Whether those similarities point to the real D.B. Cooper or just simply an unusually convincing coincidence remains unknown. Like so many of the leading Cooper suspects, Ted Braden checks a remarkable number of boxes. But no evidence has ever conclusively tied him to that flight, the ransom money, the parachutes, or the hijacking whatsoever. And as a result, he remains what he has always been, one of the most compelling suspects in the case, but still only a suspect. There's another suspect who attracted significant attention. That was Kenneth Christensen. Unlike many of the names that surfaced over the years, he became a suspect because of his own family. In 2003, a Minnesota man named Lyle Christensen, he watched a TV documentary about the Cooper hijacking, and he came away convinced that his late brother, who had been dead, Kenny, he was the mysterious hijacker. Kenny had died in 94, nearly a decade before Lyle publicly raised the theory. Lyle spent years trying to convince investigators and researchers that his brother deserved serious consideration. After failing to gain much traction with the FBI and even unsuccessfully attempting to interest author and filmmaker Nora Ephron in the story, he eventually contacted New York private investigator Skip Porteous. Well, Skip became intrigued by the possibility. In 2010, he published a book arguing that Kenneth, he was indeed D.B. Cooper. The theory gained even more exposure the following year when the History Channel series Brad Meltzer's Decoded, they devoted an episode to the circumstantial evidence connecting Christensen to the hijacking. At first glance, he appeared to possess several characteristics that fit the FBI's profile. He was born in 26, was in the Army in 44, and received parachute training. Although World War II ended before he saw combat, he was deployed to Japan in 45 and continued making occasional training jumps while serving in Allied-occupied Japan during the late 40s. After leaving the military, he went to work for the Northwest Orient Airlines in 1954. His first assignment was as a laborer on Shemya Island in the Aleutians, one of the airline's remote Far East stopover locations. Over time, he moved up within the company, became a flight attendant, and later worked as a purser based in Seattle. That employment history immediately caught the attention of Cooper researchers. Not only was he familiar with the airline Cooper hijacked, but he also would have possessed first-hand knowledge of airline procedures, aircraft operations, you get it, and the culture of commercial aviation during the era. Some aspects of his profile, they match Cooper remarkably well, too. At the time of the hijacking, Christensen was 45 years old, placing him in that age range. Also a smoker. He reportedly enjoyed bourbon, which is the same one that Cooper had on the flight. There were several notable differences, though. Witnesses generally described Cooper as 5 feet, maybe even 6 feet, about 170, 180 pounds. Christensen, he was considerably smaller. He was about 5'8", weighed about 150. I mean, that's pretty common, though. People aren't going to know exactly what height are. People, you made about 5 feet. So he's actually within the range. But those did trouble investigators. Still, some people who had encountered Cooper found Christensen intriguing. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner, who spent hours interacting with DB, she later told author Jeffrey Gray that photographs of Christensen resembled her memory of Cooper more closely than many of the other suspects she had been shown over the years. At the same time, she was careful not to overstate her confidence, too. Schaffner, She emphasized that she could not positively identify Christensen as the hijacker, and that mattered. As interest in the theory grew through books, documentaries, and media coverage, the FBI continued to evaluate the available evidence. Ultimately, the FBI remained unconvinced. Investigators, they pointed to two major problems. First, Christensen didn't closely match the physical descriptions, particularly regarding the height and build. Second, there was no direct evidence connecting him to the crime. No shit. As a result, despite the publicity generated by the theory and the intrigue and circumstances surrounding his background, guess what? The FBI, they never said he was even a prime suspect at all. Like many names attached to the D.B. Cooper mystery, he possessed some characteristics that seemed to fit. But after decades of investigation, suspicion alone, it's obviously never enough to prove that he was the man that jumped from that plane on Thanksgiving Eve, 1971. Well, of course, Ted Braden, Kenneth Christensen, there were only two names amongst hundreds and hundreds. Over the years, the D.B. Cooper case became a magnet for theories, amateur investigators, former law enforcement officers, journalists, authors, and people convinced that a friend, a relative, a co-worker, or even my drinking buddy down the road, they're the hijacker, I swear. The FBI eventually reviewed more than 1,000 serious suspects. Most of them went nowhere. Some were eliminated very quickly. Others, they lingered on for decades. One of those earliest and most heavily investigated ones was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. On the surface, McCoy, seemed almost too perfect. Decorated Vietnam veteran, Army helicopter pilot, experienced parachutist. He hijacked a United Airlines Boeing 727 in April of 72, just 5 months after the Cooper hijacking. Like Cooper, he demanded money and parachutes. And like Cooper, he jumped from the rear air stair of a Boeing 727 while the aircraft was in flight. Those similarities, they're impossible to ignore. Many people immediately assumed the FBI had finally found him. But the FBI, they disagreed. Witnesses who encountered Cooper, they didn't believe McCoy resembled the hijacker. Investigators concluded the physical differences, they were too significant to ignore too. McCoy, he was eventually arrested, convicted, and later killed during a shootout with the FBI agents after escaping from prison. Even today, some researchers remain convinced McCoy was Cooper, despite the FBI's rejection of the theory. Another frequently discussed suspect was Robert Rackstraw. Rackstraw, get it, Vietnam veteran, helicopter pilot, explosive specialist, and he was trained he was a trained parachutist with a long history of fraud, forged documents, and run-ins with the law. His military background seemed to lie with the profile. For years, author Thomas Colbert, he publicly argued that Rackstraw was Cooper and presented a variety of circumstantial evidence in support of it. The FBI investigated Rackstraw, but ultimately dismissed him as a suspect. Nevertheless, he remains one of the most widely discussed names in Cooper literature. Then, there was Dwayne Weber. Weber became famous largely because of a deathbed confession. According to his widow, Jo, her husband told her shortly before his death, "I am Dan Cooper." Afterwards, she began investigating his past and became convinced was actually the hijacker. She pointed to the various details she believed connected him to the crime, which included alleged statements he made about the case and his criminal history. The FBI examined Weber, but found no evidence to identify him as Cooper, obviously. Still, his story generated enormous media attention and helped keep public interest in the case alive. Another name that surfaces regularly is Lynn Doyle Cooper. In this case, the theory originated with family members. Several relatives claimed that shortly after Thanksgiving in 1971, they observed injuries and suspicious behavior that made them believe that Lynn had participated in the hijacking. That story gained national attention decades later when one family member came forward publicly. Investigators, they looked into the claims, but no definitive evidence emerged. And then we got one of the more unusual suspects. That's William Gossett. He was a former Marine, an Army veteran, and airline employee. He spent years claiming he knew the truth about the Cooper hijacking. According to various accounts, he alternately implied he was Cooper, knew Cooper, or had inside knowledge of Cooper. His stories changed repeatedly over time, though, making it difficult for investigators to separate fact from fiction. He's just an attention seeker. As a result, his claims are generally viewed with skepticism. And then there are dozens of lesser-known names, former military men, they're pilots and parachutists, criminals, con artists, career adventurers, men who happen to resemble the composite sketch. There's men who lived near the suspected jump zone, and men who suddenly came into money out of nowhere. Where'd you get all that money from, Bob? Men whose families became convinced they had uncovered a secret. The sheer number of suspects became one of the defining features of the Cooper investigation. Every few years, a new theory would emerge. Someone would discover an old photograph. A family member would tell a story. A researcher would uncover a forgotten document. A deathbed confession would make some headlines. For a brief moment, it would seem as though the mystery had finally been solved. Then investigators would dig deeper and the theory would fall apart. It's one reason the Cooper case has endured for more than half a century. Unlike many unsolved crimes, there's no shortage of suspects. There's actually too many of them. The problem has never been finding people who could have been D.B. Cooper. It's always been providing or proving which one, if any of them, was actually him. Whether Cooper survived or not, his hijacking had a massive impact on commercial aviation too. In many ways, the airline industry changed because of what happened on that flight. At the time of the hijacking, airport security was remarkably relaxed compared to modern standards. Cooper simply walked into the Portland International Airport, paid for a ticket, boarded the aircraft, and carried what appeared to be a bomb on the plane without being even challenged once. Even though the federal Sky Marshal program had been launched the year before, hijackings remained a serious problem. In 1972 alone, there were 31 hijackings in U.S. airspace alone. 19 of those were committed specifically to extort money. 15 of the extortion attempts involved demands for parachutes, showing just how many criminals were attempting to copy Cooper's escape plan. The surge in copycat crimes forced federal authorities to act. Early 73, the FAA, they began requiring airlines to search passengers and their baggage before boarding. That new policy immediately generated legal challenges. Critics argued the searches violated the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizures. Federal courts ultimately upheld the practice, ruling that the searches were permissible so long as they were applied universally and limited to detecting weapons and explosives. The results were immediate. Only 2 hijackings were even attempted in 1973. Both involved individuals suffering from psychiatric problems. Of those, one of those hijackers, Samuel Buck, he had an especially disturbing objective. He intended to crash the airliner into the White House and assassinate President Richard Nixon. He is not a crook. Cooper's influence also extended directly to aircraft design. Because so many criminals attempted to imitate his escape, the FAA ordered modifications to every Boeing 727 in service. The most famous of those modifications became known as the Cooper vane. The device was simple but effective. It consisted of a spring-loaded aluminum blade attached to the aircraft's aft air stair mechanism. When the aircraft was sitting on the ground, the vane remained out of the way and allowed normal operation. But once the aircraft reached flight speed, airflow automatically forced the vane into a position that physically prevented the stairs from being lowered at all. The beauty of the design was the simplicity. The system operated automatically and required no action from the pilots, and it could not be overridden from inside the aircraft. As a direct result of the Cooper hijacking, another safety measure was adopted as well. Cockpit doors were required to have peepholes installed, so flight crews could observe activity in the cabin without opening the door. Yeah, that's just common sense. Even the aircraft involved in the hijacking had an interest in life afterward. The Boeing 727 that Cooper hijacked carried the registration number N467US. In 1978, Northwest Orient sold the aircraft to Piedmont Airlines, where it was re-registered as N838N and continued flying commercial routes. Its career didn't end there, though. In 1984, it was purchased by Key Airlines and re-registered again as N29KA. The aircraft later became part of the Air Force's civilian charter fleet, transporting personnel between Nellis Air Force Base and the Tonopah Test Range during the development of the highly secretive F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter program. After decades of service, the aircraft's career finally came to an end. In 1996, that same Boeing 727 that carried D.B. Cooper into history, it was dismantled and scrapped for parts at an aircraft boneyard in Memphis. The people aboard Flight 305, they carried the experience with them far longer than the airplane did. The flight crew consistently praised Tina Mucklow for the calm and professional manner in which she handled the hijacking. For hours, she served the primary link between Cooper and the cockpit while remaining remarkably composed under extraordinary circumstances. After the hijacking, Mucklow continued flying for Northwest for several years. Unlike many people connected to famous cases, she largely avoided the spotlight too. She chose to live a private life and granted only a handful of interviews in the decades that followed. In the end, though, D.B. Cooper disappeared. The money disappeared. And the mystery, it endured. But the impact of the hijacking never vanished. Every passenger who passes through airport security today, every Boeing 727 equipped with a Cooper vane, and every airline security procedure developed in the years afterward, they owe at least a part of its existence to a man who boarded a plane under the name Dan Cooper and was never seen again. More than 50 years have passed since a man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded Flight 305 in Portland. The FBI investigated for 45 years. Thousands of leads were chased, more than 1,000 suspects examined. Forests were searched, rivers were searched, mountains were searched. The ransom money was tracked. The parachutes were studied. The tie was analyzed. Every clue was pulled apart and examined from every possible angle. Yet, somehow, the mystery still remains. Maybe Cooper died the moment he stepped into that freezing November night. Maybe his parachute never even opened. Maybe he's still lying somewhere in the Pacific Northwest waiting to be discovered. Or maybe the greatest trick D.B. Cooper ever pulled wasn't even hijacking a plane. Maybe it was convincing everyone he couldn't have survived. Because if he did, then somewhere out there was a man who spent the rest of his life watching investigators search for him, watching books get written about him, watching documentaries get made about him, watching two stupid podcasters doing another episode about him, and watching the entire world argue over his identity while knowing the answer the whole time. You gotta think about that for just a moment. A man boards a plane under a fake name. He demands $200,000. Jumps out the back of that airliner at night. Disappears so completely that half a century later, nobody can even agree on whether he lived or died. In a world where almost every mystery eventually gets solved, D.B. Cooper remains one of the rare exceptions. We got no confession. We got no arrest. We got no body. We got no answer. We've got a man, a parachute, a bag full of cash, and a cold November sky over the Pacific Northwest. And maybe that's why we're still talking about him. Because until someone finally does prove what happened after 8:13 p.m., November 24th, 1971, D.B. Cooper isn't just an unsolved crime. He's America's greatest unsolved disappearance. And that's going to do it for D.B. Cooper and Outlaws, Gunslingers on this episode. Next week, we'll be back with the murder of Kristen Costas, a jealous girl who wanted to be her, a teenager, high school. Didn't end well for Kristen Costas. We'll have that dark, OG dark, coming up next week. And that time, make sure you're subscribing on YouTube if you're listening there, or if you're listening on podcasts, give us a review, share us with your friends, leave a comment, and we'll see you next week for more Outlaws, Gunslingers, or the Multi Michiganders. Bang, bang.